If your car looks like this or your home looks like that, well, you're going to need help fixing it, right? But does insurance cover this kind of damage? We're joined today by Christopher Cook with Alliance Insurance Services to talk about what's going on. Okay, so obviously this is top of mind with everything that's happened in Alamance County this week. Some folks live by the river but weren't in a floodplain, so maybe they didn't have flood insurance.
Possibly not. Hopefully they did. Maybe they took the precaution and bought a flood insurance policy when they bought the home or at some point in time over these last several years. But if there's no flood insurance in place, then unfortunately that damage is going to be paid for out of those homeowners' pocket.
All right, so many of us will maybe, get at home, we'll look at our insurance. The person says, well, you're not in a floodplain, you don't need flood insurance. And if someone says you don't need it, then you're probably not going to get it. So if you've been told that before, what should you do now when you call your insurance company back?
Tanya, you and I have been friends for several years now, and we have this conversation every summer, right? Unfortunately, all of us can be affected by flood. Just not being in a floodplain doesn't mean your home couldn't be flooded or you couldn't experience flood damage. So we'd encourage folks to recognize that they could potentially be flooded. A flood insurance policy is probably going to cost them about $600 a year. That's money well spent when you face instances like this. And any licensed insurance agent in our state can help them get that policy.
All right, now what about the cars? We saw lots of cars that were submerged or at least had, water up, to the bottom part that could seep in there. What happens with our car insurance with that?
Yeah, interestingly, totally different than on the homeowner side, but automobile insurance policy does cover flood damage provided you have what I call physical damage, but that's comprehensive and collision. Some of you may call that full coverage, but an auto policy does cover damage from flood in this instance if you have full coverage is the most common term used.
Full coverage, okay. Comprehensive truck coverage is the kind of coverage that, like, if a limb falls on your car, you hit a deer, anything that's not crash related, right?
Acts of God, we call it. That's right, yep.
Okay, so you need to check your policy to see what you have. All right, I want to kind of like move over to another kind of insurance talk, and this is all of the people who are sending their kids to college in the next coming months, right? So when their kid goes to college, is their stuff insured, like at the dorm or at the apartment? Is it insured under the parents' homeowners?
Yes, if a dependent has coverage away from home at school, so their belongings are insured against theft or, God forbid, fire damage or any other kind of loss, and their liability extends. Now, very, very common across our universities in our state, student housing does require most residents to purchase a renter's insurance policy. So in some essences, some of our students across the state are double covered, but if the parents have a homeowner's insurance policy, that policy extends for the student. But your student housing building or apartment provider may require that student to buy renter's insurance as well.
Okay, and let's talk about this because we get a lot of questions about renter's insurance. People say, well, should my apartment building have enough insurance to cover me if something happens?
Your apartment building cannot insure your stuff. They can only insure the things they own, and you can only insure the things you own. And so your apartment building is never going to cover your clothes if the whole apartment is burned up in a fire and your furniture and your clothing and whatnot is gone. It's gone unless you have a renter's insurance policy.
Okay, and one other question about that. Two people living in an apartment, one of them has renter's insurance, they're a couple. Does that renter's insurance cover everything in the house or just for that one person?
Your family members, spouse, dependents, are covered under your policy. We get into a little bit of a weird situation when we have roommates, unrelated, unmarried roommates. Both of those parties need to have their own coverage.
Okay, and one last thing, because we were just talking about this the other day. Drivers, if they're in your house and they're of driving age, do you have to actually say that you need them on the insurance?
They have to be listed on the insurance policy, your automobile insurance policy. That is correct. And unfortunately, if they're not and they wreck the car, many of the insurance carriers in this state will deny the claim.
Okay, and that is whether the child is 16 or whether the child is 21. Doesn't make a difference.
Or 35.
Got it. And they happen to be living at home and they could drive your car. Okay, got it. We appreciate your time, your expertise, getting all of those things answered. If you want to look back at this interview, maybe send it to someone who needs to hear it. It's going to be in the Who Wants to Know section of our website. Let's check the forecast.